of connectivity. The future of connectivity. The future of connectivity. The future of connectivity.
Future. Future. Connectivity. Future. Connectivity. Future. Connectivity. Future.
The future of connectivity.
Thank you, Jirai. That was an excellent performance. I don't think we've ever seen fruit played quite like that before. We told you it was going to be about food and technology, and there you have it. So, Jirai, I wanted to ask, when was it that you realized that you could use fruits and vegetables like that?
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful summit. Yeah, I love all kinds of instruments. I love orchestral instruments. I love synths. I love producing music. And this is the next level. Using vegetables and fruits is nice to the creativity to make with new tools or make different music or new performance. Yeah.
Excellent. No, I think definitely very, very creative indeed. And in terms of technology, how important is technology to a show like yours?
Yeah. Technology for me is connectivity.
Yeah, it is connectivity.
We can connect with, for example, the first melody that I played is from a British composer, is Henry Purcell, Baroque composer.
Yes.
And this connectivity with the past is really important to me and to bring here to the future and and make, and also the tools and the code. But I need to imagine and only hear the music. Yeah.
No, it's a good fusion, speaking of Fyuz, a good fusion between technology, music, and food. I mean, it's got like all the elements in there. So that's really, really good. Now, do you perform often like this?
Sorry?
Do you perform often?
In different places, and I developing all day in my home studio and making these new sensors and motion sensors and throughout the network.
Excellent. So you're looking at all the new technologies, and soon we might see metaverse version of you performing with augmented reality or virtual reality next time.
Yeah, it's really interesting field. Yeah.
No, that's really, really good. So let me ask you, of all the fruits you had up there and all the vegetables that you had up there, which one is your favorite?
It's going to be
It's hard to pick a favorite.
They're my friends now.
I know. You're going to be upset, right? You pick one like the pumpkin, then the carrots are not going to be happy.
Yeah, now in this epoch of the year with Halloween, this pumpkin. But elements with water is nice to me, like us.
Excellent. Yeah. No, very good. Well, thank you for that excellent performance. Let's give it up one more time for Jirai.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
All right. So with that rousing start to the afternoon session, we hope that you've had a good lunch up in the street food and getting the diversity of flavors. We have a wonderful afternoon. This afternoon, we're going to start off with a panel that's scaling the Open RAN supply chain. Now, this panel, speaking of scaling, is going to be one of the largest panels ever that you've ever seen on a stage like this. This is a feat that should be attempted only by professional moderators. And so I give you Gabriel Brown, who is Senior Principal Analyst, Mobile Networks from Heavy Reading, and Gabe, the Master Orchestrator, on stage.
Roy's getting so good at those links. The very heavy bass backstage, I'm telling you, and a serious art school vibe to go with it. So my name's Gabriel Brown. I'm an analyst with Heavy Reading, where I cover mobile infrastructure. I'm going to moderate this session here on scaling the Open RAN supply chain. Now, I think there are really two parts to that. One is all the issues around supply chains that are impacting all industries and across society, so we'll talk a bit about that. But also, I think it's just about making Open RAN bigger and more successful. So to help me with this, I have 7 terrific panelists who are asked to come on stage now. Panelists, if you could join me. We have, coming through, first of all, Femi from Fujitsu. Welcome, Femi. Joel from Marvell. Alla from NEC. Malik from Samsung. Christina from Intel. Manos, I'm not going to do his second name, from Lenovo, and John from Mavenir. So, scaling the supply chain. What I'm going to do, rather than do particular introductions, I'm going to ask, as each person speaks first, they'll introduce themselves as we go. And the first question is going to be the same to everybody. We're going to start in the middle with Christina. We'll work from Manos to John, pick up. I did a different order in the prep. We'll start with Christina and then hang on. Now, the same question is, and Christina, give us your assessment of how mature and developed the Open RAN supply chain is today, and then one thing that you think would help it scale. And the reason I'm coming to you first is Intel's been involved in Open RAN for a long time. You're in every part of the ecosystem. You've invested a ton of intellectual effort and money in growing that ecosystem. So how are we doing?
So we introducing ourselves, or I just start with a question? So okay, Christina Rodriguez with Intel. I responsible for the RAN business at Intel. To your question, Gabriel, so absolutely tremendous momentum in the industry, even beyond momentum. We are seeing the progress everywhere in the world, in both greenfield and brownfield. We're seeing announcements from operators. We're seeing what has happened what is happening in the industry. And as you said, we are, as Intel, we are very committed, very excited, very optimistic about the opportunities that having a virtualized open RAN, open network will bring to the world, to the future of the network. We know that for us as an industry, as the world, in order to fulfill our ambitions for the future as far as use cases and what we want to do, we need to have the best connectivity possible, and that has to be enabled by a network that has the architecture and the infrastructure that allow to develop, or to implement and deploy and develop new functions quickly. And having that virtualized, that cloud-native, end-to-end architecture is key in order to enable that. I think it's important for what we're seeing in the industry. You were talking, what can we do? What can we do to scale faster, to move faster? One of the things that is happening that we're seeing, and we're having learnings from the deployments that are happening today and the engagements that are happening today. One of the things that we are seeing is that removing complexity is a good thing, right? We know that the architecture of choice should be an open, virtualized architecture, and having the opportunity to have the same architecture in the data center, at the core, at the edge, and at the RAN will remove complexity on how you operate your network. And I think it's important for that to enable the scaling. It's important to remove that complexity. Another thing that is happening recently, and I will mention this, is we recently announced that our 4th generation of Intel scalable processors will come in 2023, will come with something called VRAM Boost. So basically, every acceleration that you need, or any acceleration that you need, is now is fully integrated in the CPU. So from the supply chain, from the complexity, imagine that. All you need is a server. You don't need anything else, no external accelerator card. You don't need anything else in addition to your server that has the CPU with all the VRAM acceleration on it. And I think that's important to remove complexity. So innovations at that help that maturity in the space.
Okay, good stuff. So I'm going to really paraphrase that. Commonality in infrastructure. That's one way of removing complexity. Obviously, the other parts, but your one thing is let's get more common we can on infrastructure. Paraphrasing. Femi at Fujitsu, same question to you. Look, if you're going to say it's going great, you can get that over quick. What's your one thing?
Yeah. So from a equipment manufacturer's point of view, we're seeing that the ecosystem is expanding. We see even silicon providers that were not targeting RAN now coming into that place. So we're seeing a lot of new entrants into the ecosystem. From a scaling point of view, I like what I see in Europe, where mobile operators are aggregating together their requirements. What that will do is to help with how we target what we manufacture for those markets. Fragmentation doesn't help. So if we see more of that in Europe, in Asia, the aggregation of requirements will really help to scale the ecosystem even more. So for us, it's more of, we see it, we want more participation from the industry in terms of silicon, for example, as well as others. And then to scale, we need a lot of aggregation to move that forward.
Okay, so you had two things. You had more silicon providers and common requirements from operators, I think.
Yes.
These common requirements that you're talking about from the European group, do you see other regions coalescing around a set of requirements? From Fujitsu point of view in Japan or your home country of the US?
I like to see more of it. It's happening, but it's fragmented. There's a dynamic within the operator's space where we still see each other as competitors rather than friends. The more we dive into coalescing together around open, will help. So US would like to see more of that in the North American market. A little bit of that on the northern side of US. Japan, more can be done, as well as in the EMEA market as well. So coalition will help to scale.
It was interesting, the speaker from Amantel earlier, he talked about a Middle Eastern group that's also collaborating.
Right.
It'll be fascinating to see whether American operators can somehow all talk to each other without,
it will happen.
Without all that, yeah.
It will happen in our lifetime.
I'll have retired by then.
Alla from NEC.
So I actually, started to work in NSC 3 months ago, a little bit less than 3 months ago, and for my personal experience, being an insider in the company, really, just for the 3 last months, and speaking from my company perspective, we've announced collaboration for virtual media O2, where we bring Orange to actually live deployment. We announced that we are part of Orange experimental 5G networks. Actually, recently, 1 week ago, we announced that we are part of actually building 5G Innovation Lab for New South Wales Telco Authority. And also on our side of being a vendor and providing the solution, we've recently launched CUDU, which significantly extends the ecosystem and supply chain. And we launched Innovation Hub, a new Innovation Hub in New Jersey, which again would help, take the system forward. So I think this is the lot to say that, Orange ecosystem and Orange supply chain is expanding because we are just one vendor. Of course, one of the leading, but there are also others doing many things recently. Still having said that, there is a lot of space for improvement, of course, and that one single thing, how would you make it up to scale is basically make it up to scale, move from a limited deployment, from trial into a mass deployment. In Japan, actually, we've seen mass deployment of massive MIMO, while other areas in Europe, in US, service providers are watching, doing a smaller trial, doing innovation lab, but not yet moving on scale. And for us as a vendor to be cost effective, it is required also, mass scale of deployment as well as consolidated set of requirements, and we've discussed also during the previous session that basically, Orange as a standard gives many options, but it is a place of TIP, it is a place of understanding between the different service providers to bring fewer configurations which are required from us as the vendors to apply. It can be just one example, 32T, 32R, C-band, massive MIMO, it can be any, but only when we have consolidated set of requirements, we can actually bring it to scale, make ourselves cost effective, and bring Orange to a massive deployment.
Okay, so that's paraphrasing. People are going to hate this because what I'm hearing is spend more and buy more kit, and that will give some scale to the industry. And on the same kind of kit, that would be the thing. John from Mavenir, it's really echoey, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to hear.
It's difficult to hear from people down there, but anyway, sound guy, if you're there, John.
Yeah, so John Baker from Mavenir, really been right from the beginning with the early days with Justin and really pushing the Open RAN initiatives, and I like to feel myself as a champion of Open RAN. So tie up with me on LinkedIn, and you can follow the outcomes. But I think I said at a conference last week, I've never seen such excitement in the industry as I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years with new vendors, new opportunities, investors, et cetera, and we're at a point now where the rubber meets the road in terms of the ability for Open RAN vendors to compete in the marketplace against the existing suppliers. And to that extent, if price always seems to come into this thing right on day one, and if you're not actually meeting the price levels, then you tend to get excluded out the door, and so in a sense. One of the challenges, if you like, that the Open RAN community is sort of struggling with is, how to get best vendor pricing, given that a lot of us are small companies, startup companies, et cetera, and and I know probably I'm going to alienate somebody in this point, but in reality, what needs to happen is somehow the component community really sort of needs to get together and come up with a way in which startup companies, smaller companies can get best pricing for components, etc. And and I know some vendors are actually doing that, but in a sense, I draw the analogy, and now we're here on food. If I go and buy a pineapple, right, I know the price of the pineapple at the store, and everybody's paying the same price for a pineapple. Whereas in the wireless industry, we seem to have well, if you don't buy this sort of volume, you're going to pay a high price, and yet from a manufacturer of that component, they're manufacturing that component in volume. So why are the small suppliers not getting the same pricing as the large suppliers in the sense of the basic components? But there's going to be some ups and downs, and it's not a straight line for everybody. But at the end of the day, I think that's the real big challenge now that we have, is how do we get components at the most equitable price is probably the best way to describe it, because I know component vendors need to be profitable, and I'm not saying people should lower their prices, but it's about how startup companies can make radios, make servers, develop software at a price that's competitive with the existing incumbents. Because at the end of the day, from an operator perspective, if you're not competitive, then you're not going to get through the first gate through the door. So and I'll stop there. So
your point, really paraphrasing, is better pricing from the component and subsystem suppliers, because they're giving the best pricing to their existing customers who've got all the volume.
Exactly, it's all leverage to the existing incumbents, and we need to turn that leverage back to the O-RAN guys,
it's a fairly common ask from, if we put it that way, smaller companies.
Exactly. And to be fair, it's not all vendors. Some are working quite hard, and some are on the stage working quite hard at it. So, but I put the message out there in general.
Yeah. Okay, Malik at Samsung.
Yeah, so I think to me the first point to mention is we talk about Open RAN a bit as if it's in the future, but I'd like to emphasize that this is actually now, that the technology actually works. And we've been from lab to field trials to now actually real commercial deployments. So I think we've reached that stage as an ecosystem. And if I look then, so at Samsung, we've had deployments on 3 continents, many tier 1 operators, including Vodafone in the UK. Now, as Iago announced this morning, we're going to trial in Germany. So I think there's a good traction. And at Samsung, if I look at our solution, we have a virtualized baseband where we support 5G, 4G, soon 2G next year. We do low band, mid band, massive MIMOs. So I think the solution basically is there and is sort of waiting to be really deployed. If I look, at all the blocks, all the stack, we have the servers, we have the cloud platform, we have the RAN software, then the radios. And if you look today at the number of players in each of those stacks, just saying you have 3 each, it's still more than 80 combinations you can make. So I think we have some robustness that is there. Now, if you ask me about how to scale the ecosystem even more, I would agree with what Alla from NEC said. I think what we really need are sizable projects so that we can make the economics work. And it's difficult if you don't really have that demand to actually build the supply. It cannot be built, in advance, in a sense. You cannot bring new players and have innovation without clear demand and a clear market.
Let me ask this question then. What sort of forward guidance do you get? What sort of either commitment or nudge or whatever you want to say do you get on terms of future demand?
So I think Vodafone, again, is a good example, where there is clear guidance, where they say they want by 2030 to have 30% of the network on running on Open RAN. So it gives confidence in the market, and I think that's what we need to see.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Joel. I mean, we've got 2 there just saying essentially put more money into this and it'll help. So that's one thing. Joel, let's hear from Marvell.
Sure. So Marvell is the leading supplier of baseband processors to the wireless industry. In fact, today, when you connect to the network on a 5G device, most likely your connection is going to go through a Marvell device somewhere along the connection. And you heard this morning from Iago saying that both Nokia and Samsung are going to build their ORAN equipment around Marvell silicon. If I take this conversation back into the supply chain and resiliency for the ORAN ecosystem, it all comes down to diversity. We need diversity at every level. I think from a very high-level operator perspective, we've been looking at diversity at the system vendor, and that's what John represents here, right? Smaller vendors trying to compete with the larger vendors. But if we go below that and we start breaking that to the whole ecosystem that is needed in order to build a very reliable and available network, it goes down from there to the processors, to the chips that are in those systems. It goes to the different processors, whether it's an x86 or an ARM processor or a RISC processor or a DSP type equipment. It goes further below that as we are trying to source these chips from different foundries, whether it's a Samsung foundry, Global Foundry, TSMC. Even within those foundries, in order to secure supply, we need to think in terms of geographical diversity. And many of these foundries are building facilities in Europe, in Asia, in the US, outside of Taiwan specifically. TSMC is going to bring up the facility in Arizona. Global Foundries is operating already out of New York, and so on. And it goes from there to packaging and test facilities. It goes to substrate providers. So my message is diversity at all levels of the ecosystem.
Yeah, okay. And would you care, Joel, to respond a little bit to John's point? I know you recognized it in your comments. I'm paraphrasing John, if I get it wrong, correct me, but essentially he's saying if you're a smaller supplier, it's not that incentive for you to give him the good pricing. It might be other companies involved, but just for the sake of this conversation.
Take that as an example, not as what's happening in reality.
But you've got these big customers
sure.
who, what's going to move you away from them? Is it got to be we've got to look elsewhere in the ecosystem to the big server vendors or someone else with a balance sheet?
It's a very fair comment, right? There's no question that pretty much in every industry, volume matters. And we are talking about volumes of millions of units. And when Mavenir becomes the size of Nokia, they will get the same price, no problem at all.
One day.
Okay, so Manos from Lenovo, give us your little introduction and your one thing, and then we'll maybe pick up that point that Joel made about volume.
Okay, so at first, I'm Manos from Lenovo. I'm happy to be here in this fruitful discussion. So at first, to start about ORAN. ORAN is a revolutionary technology that reshapes a lot the relationships from IT players, ICT players, operators, verticals. And currently, in the current supply chain, it's typical telco supply chain, it's not dominant yet, and this is quite normal, right? Because this needs to build confidence in operators and also experience on this. And here to mention that in supply chain, sometimes we speak about network operators, but there are other use cases, for example, verticals that may use, for example, ORAN, and they may not necessarily go on large-scale deployments. So for the single thing that, to your second part of your question, for the single thing that we think that helps drive scale, we think that aggregate procurement can be a tipping point for the supply chain. It can significantly reduce equipment costs and promote the prosperity of the whole supply chain.
And so let me just check ahead there. Aggregated procurement.
Yes. Yeah. And here I want to give an example from what happens in China. So China Mobile has initiated a central procurement which attracted more than 20 suppliers and 9 of them going to be to share a pie of around 2 billion RMBs, it's $280 million. And the model that was used was the one of pre-integration. So the 9 selected suppliers need to provide end-to-end solutions, including hardware acceleration, cards, servers, CUs, DUs, RRUs, radio hubs, etc. This is an iconic event, and I think ushered a new era in the city market in China. So we think that this aggregated procurement is something that it's a single thing that we think that here drives scale. Thanks.
Okay, so it's a kind of a stage on from a common platform. It's common procurement as well.
Yes.
John, I'm going to come back to you because I'm going to challenge you a little bit there. You know, complaining. Let's say you're having a little bit of a complaint about this, but really, you know, you pitch yourself as a software vendor. What are you getting involved in purchasing volume of silicon and things? Surely that should be the service suppliers, the cloud infrastructure vendors. You should be deploying into a common environment. Every operator we talk to, every person we talk to says, we want to deploy into a common environment. Why are you getting involved? You're just mixing the pot up and making it difficult, no?
Not really, in a sense. We run our software on servers. And I think people have seen the recent announcements that we had to get into developing radios because of the lack of frequency bands that we could actually get our hands on. So, we work with a lot of third-party radio companies, and we see the same thing coming back from those third-party radio companies. So, in essence, I'm speaking out on behalf of sort of Mavenir and our partners, in terms of the way we see the pricing of products going into those markets. And I think from an ORAN perspective, we've done a very good job at the interfaces, in fact, a fantastic job at the interfaces. We're now digging into the next level that allows all of us to compete. And, and it really comes back to, justifying to the procurement guy, why is your price twice the price of somebody else's, one of the big incumbents, purely, and the majority, inside a radio, for instance, is silicon. And that's where, it gets hard to justify, well, but we're all using common chips, and in most cases, and why are we paying twice the amount for that same chip that somebody else is paying for?
Okay. Christina, since we mentioned chips about 20,000 times.
Change the conversation or give a different perspective here to what we're talking about. Yes, cost has to be there, price has to be there, and it's a competitive environment against the traditional solutions and the Open RAN and the virtualized solution. And it has to be there. Volumes are important. All that is true. CapEx in general is important. But I think when we have this conversation, we forget to talk about total cost of ownership. And we use that a lot. You see, in every conversation, we talk about TCO, but many times when we're talking about TCO, we're just talking about CapEx, right? We're just talking about the components price. I think we need to, as an industry and as a group, we need to also highlight the values of having, from the cost point of view, of having a virtualized open platform. The operations savings, general OPEX savings of what you can do when, for example, when you can fully automate your network, when you have a zero-touch automation, when you can deploy software much faster, going back to the software role here, you can upgrade, you can roll a new functionality much faster. And that's how can you bring innovation, artificial intelligence into it too. Multiple applications everywhere from traffic steering to beamforming to you name it, right? Again, deployment automation, sustainability and power consumption. So I think it's important that we look at that whole picture. There is a bigger reason for doing what we're doing, and we have to continue highlighting and continue extracting that value from there.
I think it's correct discussing it that way, but it's back to my first analogy. If I buy a pineapple and somebody else buys a pineapple, they should be the same price. That's what they do, is they compare like for like at element level, and that's where it starts to get tough for everybody.
Of course. Is there a Costco in Europe? I'm not sure. Maybe. It's the Costco analogy. You go to Costco, you buy larger volumes, you get discounts.
I think Christina makes a good point about the operations side. I mean, there is many things that go into it. So Femi, you had a comment.
I want to throw a challenge to operator industry, because one of the things that can help the scale is how Open RAN solutions are deployed, and are deployed quickly. We seem to be on the sideline where we're watching what is Docomo doing, what is Dish doing, when is Telefonica going to get there. I think we've moved, when it comes to Open RAN solutions, we've moved away from POCs where the value and the benefits are being demonstrated. So my challenge to the industry is deploy this thing. Then we will see scale, right? We will see more new entrants into the supply chain ecosystem that will really help the volume that we're talking about, the TCO that we're talking about. So the challenge is to us to harness the benefit of what we've been talking about in Open RAN.
Okay. I'll come back to you in a minute, Femi, but Alla, you had...
I really wanted to strengthen the points raised by Christina, actually. You know, there are all those issues clearly related to pricing, and I myself also mentioned those, you know, deployment on scale, but also it is very, very, very important to move to automation, right? Because, you know, manual approach is not scalable. So as, you know, as we move forward, you know, cloud native environments with orchestration, you know, domain orchestration, end-to-end orchestration, zero touch as much as possible in all the aspects of deployment, you know, in all stages of deployment. Also, you know, basically closed loop approach as much as possible. We do understand that it is a cultural shift. It will not happen one day, but as we move forward, as many closed loop approach as possible would lower prices, right? So I really think that it is also one important aspect, moving on with automation as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to pick up that point on automation and operations. I'll start with Femi and then bring others in. Femi, one of the big challenges I hear very often from operators is, well, yeah, we've got a day zero, a day one solution. It works, it's competitive. Maybe it misses this or that, but it looks good. But when we look at the solution, it's got lots of inputs from different companies. Who's going to then be responsible for the lifecycle management? If I need to upgrade firmware in one piece or change a configuration in another, or how do we have a confidence through the life cycle of a RAN, which is, let's say 7 years, 5 to 7 years for deployed equipment. One company makes a change, but how is that all governed and managed and looked after? Who gets to approve a change when it might impact some other part of the subsystem?
It's a good question. And we've come across that in many of the operators that are still lukewarm about going into the open ecosystem and bringing that as part of their network. But that is the role of a system integrator. In the closed network today, somebody put it together. We just didn't know who did that and who is doing the life cycle management. So a system integrator who understands every aspect of the RAN will be able to put it together, have mirror labs, have labs, integration labs, where these things can be life cycled before they get into the real regular network. Let me throw out a challenge. I'm a system integrator. You want to choke my neck? I'm right here. Give it to somebody like Fujitsu, who knows about the system, who knows about the RAN, to do that integration for you. I think we've come to a crossroad where we're allowing deterrents in the industry to prevent us from harnessing the power of what Open RAN, what the benefits are, the automation. Every system is integrated, whether it's closed or open. We need more system integrators who understand the RAN to be able to put that together. There are blueprints that others are putting together as well, where you can leverage what has been integrated. You don't have to do the heavy lifting yourself. So there are options. We talk about it this way, that you can choose components. We can choose for you, integrate it for you, and roll it into your network. The advantages that we're seeing is that you have options. You don't have to be locked in because somebody says, well, you don't know. So the benefit is there. We just need to harness it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to Manos a little bit here at Lenovo. how do you play in this? Say, for example, you ship a server out, but you find out later there's some bug in some piece of open source, or one of your silicon suppliers has a firmware update, or there's just something goes wrong. You need to update it. How are you making that easy for the customers or the SIs to actually, retest the system, qualify the system again?
Okay. At first, generally, as a system, Lenovo is both equipment supplier and system integrator. So, as system integrator, also we have some customer-centric approach, and generally, the maintenance and other aspects is something that we're really working on very. It's something that we work very carefully, and generally, what I can say is that if there is something, as I say, not working and this stuff, it's something that we can work it with a customer in a customer-centric way. So.
Okay, so being a bit of a system integrator. John, I'll give you a go at this, and then we'll.
Yeah, I think I didn't hear actually everything Femi said, but in this process, there's clearly process control, and somebody takes responsibility for releasing the new releases and the bug fixes, etc., out into the network. And the great thing about Open RAN and what we're seeing in real life deployments now is that you can do a lot of test before in the cloud, essentially test the products before you actually roll it out. And to that extent, I think we've where we've partnered together, even we've had 10, maybe 15 changes in a day go out, and with continuous integration and auto deployment, you can do those types of things. But it all comes back to somebody's got to put the process in place. You've got to have somebody that's going to release it, and then an environment where you can actually rapidly test bug fixes and new features and get them out in the field. But you don't have to wait a year effectively to collect all this lot together and put it out there. You can do it pretty much instantaneously.
So let me follow up then and ask Christina after John. John, what's the state of play in terms of the put it this way, the RAN automation tooling, the CI/CD tooling and all of that that you get today? For example, can we apply CI/CD to tower-mounted RUs?
The majority of it's in place. Now, we're like anything on Open RAN, we're right at the front end of this, and a lot of people learning with it. But and certainly the network deployments that we've been involved with have got process and the tools in place, and they've set up cloud environments to go do this stuff. Can we make improvements? Absolutely. And I think at some other point, but one area is really how do we make automated test systems that smaller vendors can test their products in a larger network environment. I think there are certain things lacking from a test perspective that allow small companies to really participate and test their products, and because they can't afford to go and pay $500,000 to a test equipment company for a piece of lab equipment. So there are parts of the test ecosystem that still need a lot of work.
I saw, I won't mention the company name, but there's a fellow called Victor Baal. He's chief scientist at one of these cloud companies. Smart guy, obviously. But he wrote a really interesting blog about porting, essentially, hyperscale cloud toolchain into the RAN domain. Yeah. And that kind of thing, that sort of does make you stop and think, well, who else is going to be able to invest in that level of tooling and automation? And it does look like a kind of a game changer in
I always use one of the big cloud companies as a reference because I think they've got a fantastic way of testing software products to put them on hardware, and I think as an industry that's where it needs to go. It needs to be virtual out there, and everybody participate and learn from those tools to improve products.
Yeah, Christina, your perspective on the tooling, then, even that's a little way from your core business, maybe, but
and there is a lot of work being done in the industry. And it's done prior to get to the final integration, obviously, and after that. I think number one, I go back to having a common platform, open platform that everybody understands, that is being deployed for many, many years by the cloud companies and the hyperscalers, I think definitely is the way to go and helps in the journey. I think the work, for example, we do a lot of work with the CAS vendors, right? The software CAS vendors, pre-integration work, and we have talked about that many times. We do a lot of work with the server vendors also to make sure that everything is working and integrated. and there is a lot being done also as far as validation lab by different companies, in different places, CI, CD tools, and pipelines. All that is being there and is important. I will mention Paco, which I believe it comes after us, Paco from Vodafone. He wrote a fantastic paper on system integration that I will highly recommend to everyone, and I'm sure he'll talk about it. But this is the kind of thing that the industry has to come together, and we have to learn from what is being done. We have to repeat maybe less and reuse what is there to be used, and that's how we move forward.
Okay, Malik from Samsung, you want to have a word here? I mean, because I was probably overstepping my mark as a moderator, but Samsung, yeah, we like Open RAN, etc. You've got to mention in the keynote, but quite often a Samsung Open RAN system is a Samsung system, more or less. Are you running your own tooling as well now, or are you into working with other companies? What?
So no, I don't think it's a Samsung system first. So we work actually with external, vendors for all the stack basically. So it's pretty open. And going back, to how do we get organized? So first, I agree that for CI/CD pipeline and so on, it's been there in the IT industry for a while. So I think that's something we definitely need to leverage, not reinvent the wheel. It's very robust. And then delivering those updates, those patches and so on is basically the job that Samsung and other RAN vendors have been doing for a while. So there's, I would say in a sense, nothing new, right? There's a lot of testing we need to do before releasing those software updates in the networks, but it's not something completely new, I would say. Now, to me, the question in terms of how we get organized is, I have a bit of a different view of the role of the system integrators. So I think, to me, we should do a lot of pre-work, so that it's more plug and play, and actually avoid having that extra layers, because we talked a lot about price and TCO, but actually having that extra layers, if you compare to legacy RAN, is new TCO that you're adding. So to me, the way to go actually is first do as much pre-work as you can, a lot of integration at the beginning, so that then you can integrate and manage your network easily. And I think the key partner, if you really think about it, in my opinion, should be the RAN software vendor, because this is where you have the most impact on your network KPI. So we are the ones that actually really understand the network. So if you go with a system integrator, I'm actually convinced that you sort of lock yourself in because you have externalized that capabilities to someone else. So he can choose for you, but you still have to go through that system integrator anyways. Yeah, in my opinion, actually, the operators should be more aware of that, take more on their side, build their capabilities, and partner really with the RAN software vendors.
Yeah. There's certainly a trend towards pre-integration. Yeah. I guess one of the questions as an analyst I have is, are we going away from the long-term model of fully open and things? But maybe that's a discussion for another panel. Certainly you see a lot of pre-integration going on. We've got 10 minutes left. I wanted to move to the final topic. It's a little bit of a departure. I'm going to go to Manos at Lenovo first. Manos, the question is around energy efficiency, not particularly now the energy efficiency of Open RAN versus other. We can talk about that if you like, but more, I spent a few days at the NGMN Alliance conference in Paris a few weeks ago. CTOs of the big European operators are there, and the absolute overriding theme of that conference was we need to be more energy efficient in all aspects of our business and through our supply chain. We need our suppliers to be reporting up their scope, we need to know our scope 3 emissions, so therefore we need to know from our suppliers what they're doing in their supply chain. And so you end up with this huge supply chain question of who you're buying off and who everyone in their chain is buying off. How can you help ultimately the customers who have to report scope 3 to get the big government contract or the big corporate contract for telecom services? They need to report scope 3 or they won't win the deal now. How can you help them do that in the Open RAN?
Yes, thanks. That's a very good question. So, at first to mention that Lenovo is both equipment supplier and system integrator. So we sell hardware, software, and almost full stack. So generally, we take ESG very seriously. The point is that as an equipment supplier, we drive holistically to reduce carbon in the ecosystem. This means new product design, channel, supply chain emissions, clean energy, recycle, etc. And we make products that produce new carbon. As a system integrator, we are committed also to reduce, to have a reduction of carbon emissions. And to mention here some facts from our IT business from 2021-22. So more than 90% of our suppliers conducted external carbon verifications by third-party suppliers. And more than 90% of them published carbon reduction goals, and the majority of them published some ESG reports. So we are looking from both ends, as supplier and system integrator, to reduce carbon. And we have some long-term goal for 95% of our supply chain to conduct scientific carbon reduction, and also have some plans to reduce 50% of carbon emission from operations in 2030 and 2050 to have zero emissions. So if we go, let's say, to Oran Alliance and what needs to be done, I think that it's very important to be collaborative on this. We need to. I think it's a #1 target, and we need to work all together to reduce carbon in each other's supply chain, in each other's perspective supply chain. And I think Oran Alliance starts also looking on this, because generally they start touching some aspects about energy efficiency, about how you can do some monitoring and optimization via RIC. Yes, so I think this is in the right direction, and also Oran Alliance is a very good place to discuss this, to technically enable this.
Certainly the European MOU group, they've had a plan to develop some KPIs for energy usage. Haven't actually heard the latest update on that yet. That's something if anybody knows. Find me at the breaks. I'm very interested in that. Joel from Marvell.
So we as an industry, we need to meet the target sets by the Paris Agreement on combating climate change. And that involves both downstream from us, right? When we develop a chip, it consumes a certain power. So on the downstream side, our power affects a lot of the energy consumption after us, or whoever builds the system, the operator that is using the system. And when we look at Open RAN systems, we need to optimize them for power consumption, the same way we've optimized power consumption on the traditional distributed RAN. On the greenhouse gas emission side, you asked about scope 3. So scope 1 and 2 are related to the emission that we as a company generate. And that typically is due to lighting in the office, air conditioning in the office, things like that. But the vast majority, in the case of Marvell, that's about 93–94% of our greenhouse gas emission is due to upstream generation of greenhouse as a result of the ecosystem that serves us. Suppliers to us, those that are making the chip. We're a fabless chip company. So those who make the chip are generating that amount of emission, and we are tracking that as close as we can, and we keep improving by using actual measured data as opposed to estimation data, for example, on power consumption and things like that. We are working very closely and very collaboratively with our suppliers to put in the necessary metrics to try to track that as close as possible. And if you look at our website, there's a pretty detailed report that breaks down the scope 3 emission. In the case of Marvell, about 80% of it is coming from suppliers, from vendors that we're using. About 10% of it is due to capital equipment that we are using, and a couple of percentages are due to employees commuting to the office and things like that. So we're tracking it as close as we can.
Yeah, I think even though a lot of it's upstream from you, it's still worth paying attention to is, I guess the thing. Then if we could have Alla or Femi come in. I mean, Alla, let's go with you. NEC makes radios. They consume most of the power. It's
But actually, you know, ORAN as an architecture, while you split CU, RU, DU, and basically, you know, you have that split architecture, you can do that power consumption in a significantly smarter way. So ORAN actually brings that opportunity for power efficiency and power saving. I think one additional aspect perhaps I would like to mention is actually related to RIC applications, where you also can inject smart, you know, some smart algorithms in order to provide power saving. And you know, one additional point perhaps I wanted to make on that is that I would say power efficiency is a part of sustainability, right? And as we move forward, we do not see a requirements. You know, we saw it partially in 5G. Now that people start talking about 6G, we see it everywhere, right? There is basically no new telecom generation without sustainability. So I would take it as a whole, and obviously, you know, ORAN is part of it, and we will see it being successful only if we prove that it is power efficient. ORAN gives the tools, so it is up to us as a vendor to provide those solutions, and I think we are getting there.
Okay, good stuff. Let's give Femi the last word. The clock's counting, Femi.
So Fujitsu, we actually look at this from a wider company point of view, where we're defining ourselves to make sure that we have a sustainable world. When we bring that into the RAN, everything is about lower power consumption, whether that's on the radio to make it compact, from a design point of view, even to software, where we're always looking for opportunities to turn something down, to ensure that we can leverage modularity in how we build our systems. So for us, it's not just only radios, it's also on the CU, DU, other aspects of the RAN, leveraging components that are power efficient. PA is one of the biggest components that hog power, figuring out how to do that better. So for us, it's the world entirely, because if the power consumption is too high, something is going to get hot somewhere else. Doing that efficiently so that we have a better world. Amen.
Okay, good stuff. On that note, we're going to close the panel out on time. My first time being on time all day. With that, please join me. A round of applause for the panelists, please. So I think we're going to take the stage. Roy's going to come. We'll leave the stage. Roy's going to come back. Thank you, panelists. Apologies for the echo on the audio.
Yeah, there is an echo. Echo. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. So, Gabe, before you run, So, number one, a masterful job in organizing and orchestrating that panel. That's a 7-person panel, not to be attentive at home. What were your key takeaways? What do you think of scaling Open RAN? What do you think from your audience perspective? They've listened the last 40, 50 minutes. What do you think are the 3 key things in your mind that come to mind when you
I can think of 2. I mean, I think the main thing is the tension between people making forward commitments to buy stuff wherever you are in the supply chain,
right,
versus the supplier taking on the development risk and then therefore the future success. So there's always that tension.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe the balance is about right. If everyone's a little bit, yeah, maybe it's about right. I don't know. Where that balance sits is to be determined. It feels like it's probably in about the right place, albeit there's a few issues that need addressing. The other main one really is the tooling and automation side.
Right.
So
right.
Now the problem is that's really a proxy for common platforms, minimized options.
That's right.
All that sort of thing.
That's
so
right.
I think that's
that's going to be a tricky thing, right? It's got nothing to do with Open RAN itself. It's the underlying telco platform, the telco cloud, the telco processes, all those elements, right? So more complicated, but probably to be revisited in your next 8-member panel. So hopefully. All right. Well.
Good stuff. Thank you, Roy.
No, thank you, Gabe. A huge round of applause to Gabe. Nicely done. All right. So we scaled our Open RAN, say we did, for instance. Now, there's an important part of it right, that we need before we can actually scale and get there and get reliable RAN. And that is something that we usually forget till too late, and that's testing and integration. So as we know, testing and integration is a critical enabler of any kind of technology, including Open RAN. And so up next, we have our next panel that covers testing and integration. And to do that, let me introduce you to Francisco Martin, who is Group Head of Open RAN from Vodafone. Paco?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. It's all yours.
Thank you, everyone. I would start by introducing the panelists today. I think we have a very good team of them. So Aurelio from Accenture, please. Samet from Viavi, Kalyan from Keysight, and Moham from Capgemini. We have a very good mix between testing companies and also system integrations. We don't have too many operators, just Vodafone, but this time playing the role as moderator. And I will start saying, I think today is going to be historical. Historical for good reasons. I mean, there's a lot of history that is not good, but I think it can be good because we certainly have the right people to talk about this topic, system integration and testing. And I also think system integration and testing is the right topic now because we have been spending a lot of time creating an ecosystem out there, creating solutions. For the most part, we already have them. We have disaggregated everything, but now how do we put everything together back so that it can work and it can actually be deployed? And I think in the next few months, we will have to prove that this works. So I'm going to start talking about the challenges and our view as operator, and then we'll get into the conversation. So from our side, I think it's all down to one word, collaboration, because if you look at the traditional way of doing radio, there is one role clearly assigned to traditional suppliers. Now, there is that work is not there anymore from the perspective of one company doing everything. You need to now rely on a number of companies. There is a number of operators. Everything could get very complex. And there is no easy solution in the sense that one company is doing everything. You need to truly rely on the ecosystem, truly create a network of collaboration so that you can have an end-to-end system that is efficient, something that can work. We cannot build tens and tens of labs to do the product integration. So collaboration is, I would say, the key word and the key challenging from our side. For that reason, I'm very happy with one of the announcements that was made this morning, and it's the Vodafone collaboration with Docomo. We need to start promoting this type of collaborations so that we don't repeat tests, so that we don't build multiple labs. And it's something that should happen between operators, but also with the supplier ecosystem. We still need the R&D from some of the companies that you guys are here today to help us building the end-to-end solution. So collaboration is key, and also I would say it's very important that we find a way to deliver final solutions to the field, because in our case we are trialing, we are testing and making sure that a number of configurations work well. But how do you communicate that to other operators? With over 500 operators in the world, who do you call if you are a small operator in one country? We need to find an answer for that, and collaboration is part of the answer to this, part of the solution. But I also think that TIP and the Orange Alliance, to extend, can help with the coordination of those activities, so that eventually there is a number of solutions that can be certified, that can be deployed, and that are available for everybody. So without talking too much more on this for now, I would like to start asking my colleagues to introduce themselves a little bit, and I would also like to know a little bit of your view on what are the challenges and also how to scale the full thing. So Aurelio, please, what's your view?
Thank you, Paco. Good afternoon, everyone. Aurelio Nocerino, Accenture. So we've been working quite a lot in large-scale Open RAN deployment, both in Europe and in Japan lately. So, and together with trials, and we have some good lessons learned from this point on how we take to scale, or what are the barriers that we see. Let me say that I see three main challenges that we need to go through to really scale in the Open RAN deployment. First one is around the technology readiness, and I'm not saying anything new into these respects. It's a relevant challenge, but it's something that's considering that the hardware platform are here to stay, and you need to carefully plan for them in deploying in the network. Most of your overall infrastructure is software-based, and we have seen also in real-life deployment, once you have the right automation tool in place, how it can be quick really to upgrade even 20,000 or more sites in one go, really making the feature readiness something that over time can be achieved. It's not easy, require financial stability in all the ecosystem partners in order to keep up with the effort that is required to get to the same level of feature that exists into the traditional RAN, but there is, I would say, a clear way forward into these respects. One other barrier that we see in some operator, I would say is also many, is something that we typically we don't talk that much, is also the procurement model that we see, and this is mostly related also to the TCO. On one side, we're talking, and we all know how much Open RAN is open by definition into this respect in terms of technology, need to be open in the way of working, but also in the way of procuring or acquiring or buying this infrastructure is something where we need to have the same level of openness. So in many cases, with some remarkable exception, and I mean, we have on stage someone that are not going for that path, we see that in many cases the procurement model is the solution supplier model or the single neck to choke. This creates, by definition, two big barriers. On one side, the TCO itself, because having one single commercial partner creates a margin stacking effect that, given how is relevant the RAN investment in infrastructure, create a cost overhead that typically impact the overall TCO in any case. And on the other side, create also a barrier to an open ecosystem, because having one single partner orchestrating on behalf of many different vendors, and we have seen in real-life Open RAN deployment up to 40 or 45 vendors collaborating, having one single solution supplier acting on behalf of this is, in many cases, a showstopper to the innovation and to the open collaboration that is required to get to the required level of industrialization. Third and last is, I mean, having so many moving parts, and I was mentioning 40, 45 is not something out of the world if you sum up all the stack player plus the security player plus the tool. It's a large number of moving parts, and there is the effort required for interoperability and for testing is something that no single supplier can afford, or even no single operator can afford by himself. And so there is a need, a must of distributing the testing and integration effort across the ecosystem partner. This can happen across three main dimensions, so three main elements that need to be addressed. On one side, you really require to expand the boundary of the testing itself, shifting it left as much as possible, and distributing the burden of the testing activity across the different vendors themselves, each one playing this role. This requires something that's in the way of working of many operators does not happen, that is the release engineering. Really being able to coordinate and to orchestrate what is the release plan for the Open RAN stack for a single operator across all the ecosystem vendor in a consistent way. And this is a completely new way of working. That's a new discipline that need to be introduced somehow, and we learn in a hard way that is required. The second is really having the CI/CD tooling, so all the automation expanding at the boundary of the operating network, the vendor, the operator lab, and getting also to the lab of the ecosystem partner, creating a continuum of CI/CD, being able to create the single pane of glass, the single view of what is happening into the promotion flow of the software from the vendor to the platform itself. This requires creating also the proper collaboration environment and not a competing environment, because in many cases, the vendor that participate in an Open RAN ecosystem are in some way also competitor. So creating the precondition that's collaboration rather than competition is triggered is really relevant to shift the way of working and to unleash also the potential of such a big ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are here in collaboration again, and obviously, as you say, we are all learning. It's developing a new framework, new processes, and certainly, yeah, a lot to do in this space. So, Same, what's your view?
So thanks, Becco, and thank you for having me here. You know, we in Viavi, we have a unique perspective on this problem, because we get involved initially in testing in the lab with a lot of the traditional vendors, and now with all the Open RAN vendors testing, performance and interoperability and all of that. And then we get actually involved later on with the actual deployments, and now you start scaling it and testing, first field office application, and then you're scaling and building it. And then we get also involved in the troubleshooting and operation and optimization. So actually we have a unique perspective in that, is that, a lot of the testing before was kind of like, yeah, you have one neck to choke, you know exactly which vendor you have to work. It's a black box in many cases, and you have to test it from both sides. Now you open it up, so you have to have this collaboration and openness in the testing environment itself, so that you will be able in the lab to bring in all the different vendors and certify it and test performance, right? Not just conformance. But what's unique about this, disruption in the openness is that you actually have to look at how this is going to perform in the field. I mean, remember, we have a history of 40 years of, traditional network, even though, different generation and so on, but the difference was not as disruptive of this one. So you have this accumulation of a lot of these. What are the use cases? What are the corner cases and all of? Now we're opening up these completely different new vendors that some of them are new to the environment, right? So how you bring in a lot of the field expertise back to the lab, right? So that you can continuously, as you said, CI/CD, continuously testing and let's be real, when this is gonna go and scale, you're gonna find problems that you didn't anticipate. I say your worst problem is the one you don't know yet, right? So this is how you build a system with the integration that brings in not only lab information and so on, but you have to bring the field information back on. And then you have to also be more open. I mean, this is not going to be one-time testing. I mean, that's traditionally people think about that, but this is going to have to be continuous. So how to instrument some of what we have been doing in the lab and the field as part of the operation of the network itself, continuous monitoring, operation optimization. So, the beauty about the openness is that now you have an ecosystem that you can bring all of these things together. But the challenge is, you need to coordinate across these different pieces, including lab, field, optimization, monitoring, and bring all of these data in a cycle way that, you start and you go and deploy, and then you learn and you bring it back so that you next have more confidence in how this is going to work. So this is a main challenge we see today, is that there is a disruption in the way traditional operation works. Now, add to it, we are moving to a complete cloud native software. So what used to be traditional testing has to be now cloud-based and, say, shift left and distributed. So that's add to the challenges. But again, this is the reason why testing is important, because these challenges you have to face them and anticipate a lot of these changes ahead of time, and also be ready for how to recover from problems. It will be naive saying there will be no problems, but how you build a system to learn from it, include this in the next version, and then continuous improvement and optimization.
Yeah, it certainly needs to be continuous. We'll have problems, and I mean, we can foresee having conflicts between fixing problems and developing new products. Yeah, it's all coming together. Yeah, a bit of a challenge. So, right. Okay, thank you, Samet. Kalyan.
Thank you, Paco, and fellow panelists. It's a great honor to be here. I represent Keysight. I drive the Open RAN program. Keysight joined ORAN even before its existence. It was called XRAN at that time. And the disruption was just about to start happening. And there's no question, like what Sameh said, testing is important. I would even go on to say testing has to be on steroids for this to work. And the reason I'm going to say that is there are just so many components coming into play. So one of the things Keysight did was we combined the RF expertise of Keysight and a few of the acquisitions we had on the core network side, on the RAN side, put that together to form an end-to-end ecosystem of test simulators. And this is very vital as you try to test use cases that span all the way from the edge to the core and the cloud. And the lines are blurring. Lines are really blurring because things that used to be in physical boxes are now moving virtual, and they're already been in the cloud. Hyperscalers are coming into the picture. Traditional operators are forking out part of their networks to hyperscalers, so that's another difference that's happening. So just the number of players in the ecosystem is just so vast. It gives us an opportunity to test each of these components. You got to make sure these components are working in isolation. Then you put that together. It's like building a car with parts from so many different places. It's almost like, as an operator, you would rather buy a Volkswagen from one dealer rather than buying all the parts and putting it together, which is where the systems integrators come into play as well. But the challenge here is there's no question that all these things have to work in cohesion. And the alliance, both TIP and ORAN Alliance, are really trying to standardize things. That's going to take some time to mature, but some of this is also leading from the front, where we interoperate multiple components, and that becomes the standard in some cases. So I think the challenge is enormous, but it's also a great opportunity. As they mentioned, CI/CD becomes vital. You have to automate. It's not just testing, because you got to automate. Every day, things change. You go to an operator network, there are just, let's say, 10 different components sitting there. Each one is a different software build. It works great today. You go next day, it doesn't work. And again, the lab-to-live concept is very vital because that line is also blurring. You move something that's graduating quickly from a lab to a live environment, and if something doesn't work, through CI/CD, you bring it back and you fix the issue, you promote the next load. Today, you see about 2 to 3 loads every week. It used to be 1 every 3 months, 6 months. So just the enormous number of things that is happening is just mind-boggling, but it can be done. And I think all of us have to reset a little bit to understand, the various combinations possible, CI/CD, automation, reporting, monitoring regularly, and making sure you make the adjustments very fast, and really pointing to where the issues are. That's the big challenge. It could be anywhere in the ecosystem, and that's where we all have to put our hands up as a team and say, hey, that's where the problem is. Let's go make a quick fix.
Yeah, that's true. In a world where you are allowing many more participants, there's a complexity that you need to tackle somehow, and the automation is for sure one of the ways to bring things down to the right
Absolutely.
Point. Very good. Mohan, what's your
good afternoon. My name is Mohan. I represent Capgemini. I lead the system integration practice. For Capgemini, when we look at this, it's a several layers of challenges, which just translates in. First of all, the technology part is one, where, of course, today when we see, and I almost look at ORAN as trying to orchestrate a fine orchestra of so many instruments coming and playing together. Individually, they are great, but how do I put them and play them together? I mean, that's what a system integrator is looking at. But for us, the technology part is the front end, where we have to now start dealing with multiple layers of technologies, trying to integrate them together, getting to a standardization, building them together, and then trying to roll it out. So for us, the focus on blueprinting and bringing various components, working with our partners in form of testing. And even on the testing side, we have two of our leading vendors here. For us, what is the challenge is how do I bring an automation common framework across so that it is still not dependent on one versus the other. I mean, that is the challenge as a system integrator for us. So the technology challenge for us from a Capgemini perspective, when we look at it to say, okay, how do we fix and solve the technology issues of interoperability, where we know the vendors are going to do their part, but how am I going to help an operator like you come up and say, this is now a validated, almost a pre-integrated, pre-validated solution. Now that's part of it. Now that is just the first stage for us. But now if you have to roll it into a mass scaling, then it becomes a bigger challenge in terms of what it is for an operator is almost like an operational transformation that they have to come up with, because there are new processes, there is a upscaling of a lot of talent that's coming in, that's going to be new software that's coming in, things which are in boxes are now going to be in software. So for that, how do we transform ourselves from as a system integrator to kind of address the needs of the market? Because if we are able to do that, we are able to partner up with the likes of yourselves to say, let's go do the mass of it. But at the end of the day, the real reason we are all in here is to say, how are we going to bring about the final operational efficiencies in terms of reduction in CapEx and OpEx? What we see from a Capgemini perspective is the initial barrier is high. The investment into it is high. That is a reality, right? We have to put in money to get to a point where this will start giving the results as we need. Now, that is a road, Now, all of us are committed to it and we have to go for it, but it is still a challenge where Oran and others help us to kind of come up to the point where there is going to be certain levels of investment that we have to put in as a team, as an ecosystem to say, let's enable it, start it, and then realize, because I don't think we'll see the operational efficiencies in CapEx and OpEx right out of the bat, because there is going to be a time where we have to make the parts fit together. And that's that thing. So that leads to what my friend from Accenture was saying is the TCO. In the end of the day, it's like a 4-layered cake. And I feel that at the stage, we are trying to address the first 3 layers. Then we go to the second layer, then go to the third layer. So trying to address all of it together is going to be a big challenge. But if we don't start from the base of how we blueprint, how we test, how we automate, how we put it, and then we look at how we scale it, so that when we do roll it out, how do we scale it? I mean, all of that has to come together to actually make it work. And that from us, from Capgemini, we look at ourselves saying we are transforming to become solution integrators. It used to be we were big in IT integration, but today it's about NT, IT, OT. So it's for us, the spectrum is vast for us to change. And that's a challenge for us to transform ourselves so that we can address the markets of the CSPs and come to you and say, hey, we'll be able to do that. And that's how we view it from Capgemini.
Yeah, that's true. Even companies that have been around for many, many years, you need to transform yourselves. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to Aurelio. So how is Accenture approaching Open RAN? So what's your message to operators that are potentially listening? And also, we've been talking about TCO a lot. So what's your view then on Open RAN? Is Open RAN going to be more expensive or not?
That's the tricky question. As I said before, so starting from the last question, what we see is that what we observe on the market, both on the real deployment or the TCO analysis that we are performing, or even the trial, is that we really go for a disaggregated cost model, not only for a disaggregated network, but also for a disaggregated cost model, and we let and we really incur in this TCO calculation. There is a way forward for Open RAN to being competitive, and it's also considering the economy of scales and the price of the hardware and the software that is dropping over time. Of course, this depends in many cases, mostly in the brownfield, in the level of readiness of the network, of the operator in terms of how much front-hauling or mid-hauling or back-hauling a fiber is already there. But what we observe on the market, that's a disaggregated cost model and a level of readiness in a brownfield network really makes, also from a cost perspective model, very viable, the Open RAN. What we are doing, the second part of your question, what we are doing as Accenture in order to be ready from this point of view. So we've been investing a lot to address the challenge into these respects, both in building software assets that enable the CI/CD, and so all these automation plugging smoothly in tool from our colleague here, like VAV or Keysight, in order to create really that automation backbone on top that is really required. And we're investing also somehow in a hard asset in terms of availability of lab around the world from our standpoint, where really can be part of the ecosystem of this distributed lab that accelerate all the testing exercise and activity. Last but not least, we believe that the industry need to teach the industry on how to evolve itself. And into these respects, we invested heavily in participating to TIP and TIP Academy to create exactly the right context for the industry to get to the right level of upskilling that is required to get the benefit out of this. Last message for the operator is, because many times I see or in many discussions, an operator needs to become a system integrator. Accenture or CAP, they are system integrator, so we are on the competitive path. I don't think this is the case, because the role of the operator, as I say, is more the ecosystem orchestrator, so the one that really drive this disaggregated network and this ecosystem into the right direction, having the right control point. And the system integrator is part of this ecosystem that need to be orchestrated as part of a whole. So I think that is just the message.
Thank you. So Samet, in the world of tools, that's also learning and evolving, so how are you coming up with the right portfolio? What's your thought process, and how do you differentiate for Open RAN lab versus a traditional lab for operators? How are you building the portfolio?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I mean, let's be realistic. Open RAN is still maturing. I mean, we are seeing a level of maturity, but it's also happening in stages. For example, we're seeing our use and open front hauls are maturing more and more, and this is where we're going to see a lot of big deployments and big expertise learning. So our tools traditionally, where we bring in a lot of the lab data, what we are seeing also is that we need to bring in a lot of field data at all the different levels. Traditionally, most of the testing in traditional way was always done in silos. You test the RF, and then you're going to test the transport, and you test the optical, and you test the services, and so on. We believe in Open RAN, this cannot be done anymore. We have to bring in all in cohesion, make kind of data analytics as part of the testing itself, not just pure physics and all of that. You have to actually build a test model, software-based, but also build these data analytics. And the second thing is, bring in a lot of the tools to build an emulated environment of how the field is going to look like. I think this is, the concept of digital twin and the concept of, building a digital lab where realistic data. So we have a lot of tools in the field, for example, collecting location intelligence and optimization information that we can bring in to do more realistic channel modeling, for example, right? More realistic modeling in the lab. So, you are prepared to actually test, the new ideas like RIC, policies and all of it. You can actually test them on something that is more realistic just than focusing on lab sensitivity. So a lot of these tools, and now we're bringing them together, working with our partners in system integrator to build kind of analytics testing, not just pure protocols and so on. Actually we're saying we're adding like hundreds of use cases every month for the Open RAN, that was not there before. So bringing all of these data, correlating them, and providing this kind of realistic environment that you can test and actually open this environment later on for apps. You're doing an ORAN so that not only you're bringing in new vendors, but you're also bringing in new applications. So how you test these new applications in an environment that is realistic, but is not the actual network. So this concept of we're working with TIP on doing bringing information from the field, working with some of the RADP and building realistic models of the environment, so that you can have more confidence that Open RAN not only interoperability, but interoperability in real environment.
Very good, thank you. Kalyan, I think, so if we look at the testing, how do we make sure we have some sort of common testing? How do we even support organizations like TIP to organize all that? What's your approach for
yeah, so first thing is, just like the physical boxes are, going away in many cases in the Open RAN. I mean, you keep the physical boxes where you need it, and the rest of it is virtualized. Similarly, the tools and the framework, the test framework, have to evolve into a software-based solution where possible. If you take the DU and the CU, they're already moving to that, and CU is already moving to the cloud. DU, there's components that are virtualized, components that are in the cloud. So it's extremely important as test solutions, we are also part of the cloud native framework. And there's a big difference between being in the cloud and being cloud native, as you know. And the big advantage in being cloud native is the elastic scalability. As you look at these frameworks, in the past, you would work with a customer who is wanting you to generate X amount of traffic, and you have a price based on the traffic. You actually sell X number of boxes for that particular test scenario or test suites. Now, you can't do that because you just don't know what exactly is going to happen. So just like a hyperscaler does, you pay as you go, and you can expand as you go, and you're scalable as you go. And you're also going to be in a multi-tenant environment where you are in as a test solution along with the real DU, the real CU pieces, and even real DU is broken into so many bits and pieces. So it's a different framework, but that is the framework. You're going to have to work in that type of a cloud framework. Now, in that, you include things like interoperability and conformance and scalability type of tests. So those are, I would call conformance as table stakes. Interoperability is evolving because there's going to be some variations there, but the scalability is definitely going to be part of the whole cloud. So you actually put all of that into that framework.
Very good. Okay, so Mohan, what can we do to accelerate everything? We seem to have many things to do. How can we speed up?
That's a good question for a system integrator, right? Look, I think for us, as I said, the ecosystem play for Capgemini, ORAN is something which is a big opportunity for us because truly we do believe that we can play a major role, and SIs can play a major role in pulling the solutions together. So for example, what we are doing is a lot of investment into labs, where we are actually working with a lot of our partners, and we actually have live programs running with Keysight, and we are bringing together and actually preempting solutions in the market, right? And also on top of it, what we do see is for scaling this into mass, automation and testing is key. If you do not have automated testing and deployment, this is not going to work because as a real life example, if it took 500 test cases to be tested in 2 weeks' time, we need to come to a stage where we have to do these 500 test cases in 2 days' time. And that is only possible if we have proper testing framework. So our focus is also into automation and testing frameworks which you can build. Now, there are testing tools available in the market, so what we're trying to do is build the umbrella under which you can fit these, leverage these tools and run on top of blueprints with the involvement of the CSPs. This cannot be done just by us, because at the end of the day, for you to roll it out, unless an operator is going to roll it out en masse, ORAN is not going to be successful. So in a way, the ecosystem here has to be together. Almost I feel that the vendors who produce the CUDU RUs have done their jobs. They're going to respect the standards. It is going to be up to the system integrators, the operators, and the testing and the tool automation folks to come together and now tie it all up together. And that's how we are going to look at it. That's how our focus is. That's how we are accelerating towards it.
Very good. Thank you. So just the final 10 seconds for the last message, Aurelio.
No, once again, I think that there is a bright future ahead of us. And the collaboration and unleashing the way of collaborating across all the ecosystem is really the key of success to get O-RAN to the next stage of deployment.
Thank you. Femi?
Yeah, I agree, and I think testing and integration and building this kind of environment that helps get more confidence is going to be an evolving, environment. But I think it's very important, and O-RAN I think is going to benefit a lot of the evolution in the testing environment as well.
Very good.
Perfect. Yeah. So O-RAN is definitely for real, as you've heard throughout this morning's session. And testing, there's a great opportunity for everybody involved in both putting things together as well as testing individual components. I think, as the ecosystem evolves and as we put end-to-end stories, it's going to be even better than what was there before.
Thank you.
Yeah, for us, it's also the same. And see, collaboration, enabling the ecosystem, and actually starting and breaking down the chunks, because you can't bring the wall down in one shot. We have to go step by step. And I think that's the message I see.
Very good. Excellent. So time passed very quickly. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Keep pushing. This is the year. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, panelists. If you would step out, and Paco, just come over here with me, the fruit stand.
Yeah, we're going to go.
I was thinking of offering you a pineapple, but I'm not sure that would be great. All right, let's watch the video, since they put so much effort in. All right, that was an excellent job. Testing and integration, an important topic for sure.
Yeah.
So I think for the audience, I mean, they sat through, it was really exciting. What do you think the key takeaways would have been for you, right? What do you enjoy about the panel? What was the smartest question that you asked?
Yeah, thank you. No, I think the key takeaways are, I think, clearly we all see benefits for Open RAN, for the innovation part. But clearly there is a complexity added because of managing so many different pieces. And that needs to be tackled. And the way to do that is first through collaboration. We have been talking a lot about that. Also, automation is a key part. And I think in the next few months, we will be talking a lot in the industry about the real benefit from automation. And I also think there is a role to play for organizations like O-RAN Alliance, and particularly in this area, I would say for the TIP as well.
Yes.
And we need to ensure we can industrialize all the processes. And it's true that it's all new. We are all learning, and obviously it's very clear. That's a takeaway as well. We don't have all the answers.
That's right.
But I think we have most of the questions.
I think that's important. Knowing what questions are asked is important. As you point out, collaboration, O-RAN Alliance, and TIP need to come together to make sure integration and testing work out. But thank you again, Paco. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you so much. All right. So we've all heard about the RIC, the RAN Intelligent Controller. It holds a lot of promise. And what we're going to learn now is going to be a very, very key thing from the next panel, which is not only are we going to deliver on the promise, we're going to over-deliver on the promise. So next up on the panel, I would like to introduce one of my favorite analysts, Staliana Baleva, who is the principal analyst from Light Counting. Staliana, will you join me on stage, please? Thank you.
Hi, Roy.
Thank you. All right, the panel and stage is all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Hello, everyone. Well, the most exciting topic, I think, for today is RIC, the Radio Intelligent Controller, which is bringing a lot of intelligence to the RAN to solve some of the long-standing issues in terms of optimization. I'd like to welcome our experts today to the stage. So please welcome Andrew from Meter and Tarov from Nokia.
Thank you.
We also had a third presenter today on the topic of RIC. Unfortunately, he was not able to be with us here on the stage. This is Rob Sony from AT&T. So Rob recorded a video telling about his story, about his RIC journey, what drove the operator motivation to develop RIC in their operator environment. It was a fascinating experience that AT&T worked together with Nokia. So Rob provided us a recording of his video message, and I suggest we first start by watching the video.
Thank you, Caroline. Hi, I'm Rob Sony, VP of RAN Technology at AT&T. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about our journey with the RAN Intelligent Controller, also known as the RIC, hear about the ways that we as an industry can work together to deliver on its promises. AT&T's RIC journey actually began during the early days of AT&T's D2 network virtualization program. At the time, there was a lot of buzz around software-defined networking, but all of it was focused on wireline, not wireless, which accounted for the largest share of AT&T's network investments and operating costs. So we worked with Stanford University to support the creation of a RAN-oriented SDN controller in the XRAN forum, which subsequently became known as the Near Real-Time RIC in the ORAN or Open RAN standards. We also supported early efforts to bring automation to the RAN by driving projects such as SDN-R into the Linux Foundation's ONAP project. The goal of these efforts was to allow the introduction of AI/ML technology into RAN operations to enable an intelligent, efficient, and autonomous wireless network that is more responsive to customers and application needs. At the time, AT&T already had a strong and long-standing internal SON program, but it was still a challenge to find usable innovation from the outside to supplement it. Many companies wanted to work with us, but it was difficult for them to bring their ideas into our network due to the closed nature of the RAN equipment ecosystem. Through Open RAN, we saw the opportunity for the industry to develop an expanded set of performance and standardized APIs for network automation and control across the RAN stack. We also wanted to jumpstart the industry by accelerating real implementations that multiple vendors can make products from. Open source was the key. While we already had seeded ONAP in the non-real-time RIC space, the near real-time RIC was uncharted territory. From early on, we knew that the most difficult part was going to be opening up radio resource management layers due to the sheer technical complexity and the amount of intellectual property involved. We wanted to work with someone who not only had deep RAN expertise, but also a willingness to innovate, take risks, and find a viable path to take the outputs to market in a deployable way. After receiving several strong proposals from across the industry, we chose Nokia. AT&T's main aim in the collaboration was twofold. One was to identify the use cases for near real-time network optimization and test them in a live network setting, and two, to jumpstart the supplier ecosystem and accelerate work on real products and use cases beyond paper standards. Since there was no existing open source SDN controller capable to support the low latency requirements of near real-time control, we had to first build a modern containerized platform that was robust enough to be introduced in a live production network. The platform was seeded in the ORAN open source community early to encourage early participation from others. Over the next couple of years, the team did a series of live trials of increasing complexity, ranging from testing a near real-time control loop on a single G-Node B with an experimental E2 interface, all the way to holistically optimizing an entire network to improve quality of experience and spectrum efficiency. And we didn't do this in some back region or backwater either. These trials were done in some of AT&T's busiest urban markets in New York and New Jersey, so we could gather learnings on what works and what doesn't work. We tested several use cases and settled on driving a few key ones, such as AI-driven traffic steering to enable a better distribution of traffic in today's complex RAN environment with its mix of low and high bands and small and large cells. That work still continues, and we are seeing some quite promising results. I'll say for now that getting more fine-grained data and using that information to make changes faster than ever before are allowing for standard configurations to be driven in new and highly dynamic ways. When it comes to jumpstarting the supplier ecosystem, I will also say that we've been quite successful. When we submitted the seed code into the ORAN open source community in 2019, it was just AT&T and Nokia. Today, there are at least 4 to 5 vendors who've announced commercial near real-time RIC products. We've seen dozens of trials at operators all around the world. What we need to see more now is investment in the app space to see this space mature, both on the X apps and the R apps. AT&T believes that there's strong potential to drive significant improvements in network capacity, quality of experience, resiliency, and efficiency using data-driven AI ML algorithms, optimization, and automation. We're already seeing some initial seeds starting to sprout, but we need more vendors to work with us to create meaningful proof points and demonstrate this value in tangible ways. That is what will prove the power of these open platforms. We also encourage full stack vendors who believe they have best of breed algorithms, automation, to ask themselves if they can make those available to operators who may be on a different RAN stack through the use of X apps and R apps. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Interesting and fantastic experience in pioneering RIC at AT&T in the US. They work together with Nokia, and we're happy to have our Nokia expert here. So Torav, can you follow on the story and tell us from your end some of the lessons learned during this experience?
Well, yeah, thank you. I can, but before I start talking about the RIC positioning and value, I would actually start with a small step, and that's my first step on the path to the working on the near real-time RIC. And that actually started with me walking back from the coffee machine when my manager was asking me into his office for a chat. And this was pre-COVID-19, when there were still real people on the way back from the coffee machine. Nowadays, it's just a family dog looking at me, asking for food. So my manager asked me, do you want to drop everything, work on the near real-time RIC together with AT&T? And then he gave a couple of more points on what the near real-time RIC was all about. On the spot, I said yes. And so what were those points that he made that convinced me? And I still remember one of the main points was about we want to make the RAN, the radio access network, programmable, customizable, and extensible. And this brings me maybe to the first of 3 points on the benefit and value of the RIC. The first one is about compute offload. So as soon as you want to make the RAN programmable, you want to run additional programs. We call them nowadays X apps. If you want to run them, you need to find a place where to run them. You can run them on the E node B, you can run them on the G node B, but then you need to dimension the hardware for these programs without knowing in advance how many are going to be there, how complex they are going to be. If they apply machine learning algorithms, do you need AI acceleration like GPUs? So to sidestep this question, we actually extract these programs out from the E node B and G node B and place them into the edge cloud, and we get all the benefits of the cloud. We get cloud elasticity. We can scale out as there are more X apps coming, as the X apps are getting more complex. And we also get the benefit of being able to even out the peaks with some clever scheduling that you get from all the programs that you won't normally run on the G node B. This brings me then to the second point, which is about experimentation, customization, and extensibility. At some point, we call this roadmap offload because we want to give the ability to operators, to third parties, but also to the more research-oriented organization within Nokia to experiment, to customize. And we see, for instance, right now, many organizations working on energy-saving X apps because we give them the ability to do so. The third point is about contrasting the near real-time RIC against SON solutions. And what we see is that many of the algorithms that run on the SON side, on the self-organizing network side, they actually get additional benefit or additional gains if we move them into the near real-time RIC. And also there's a full new class of algorithms that we can run on the near real-time RIC that you can't run on the SON side. And they get additional gains from 2 things. One is they can do optimization on a finite granularity level. They can optimize on UE level or on a group of UE level. That's what's specified in the E2 standard, that the RIC speaks to the G node B and E node B. And they also can optimize on a time interval from sensing to action that's much smaller. That can be sub-second, while on the SON side you typically talk about hours or days, or in the best case, about minutes. And by moving these intervals from sensing to action into very small intervals, you can actually, in many algorithms, reduce safety limits that you otherwise have to employ, because you can't predict exactly what will happen in each and every situation. And by reducing these safety limits, algorithms get additional benefits or gains. So to summarize, compute offload, roadmap offload, additional gains from optimization on UE level, and then additional gains from optimization, from smaller optimization intervals. So this is what I wanted to talk about in terms of positioning of the RIC.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really a lot of benefits that RIC is bringing into the optimization. So next, Andrew, do you want to say a few words what you do in Matrix in terms of validation and testing of the RIC?
Absolutely. So first, thank you everybody for coming. You know, I know that RIC stands for Radio Intelligent Controller, but the way I often think about the RIC, given that, you know, my organization is quite a fan of the capability, is the Radio Innovation Center. You know, a lot of the 5G deployments that we've seen happen, right, have been built around enhanced mobile broadband, right, trying to you know, enhance, for lack of a better word, you know, people's consumer broadband experience. But you know, we're looking for how to accelerate the deployment and adoption of 5G, and obviously, as we've heard throughout the day, right, that's driven by where the money's coming from. And so trying to find, you know, that return on investment, that innovation, you know, with the RIC is something that I think is still evolving. But in particular, one of the things that we think that the RIC will allow for is to take more of a sprint towards creating an ultra-reliable, low latency or massive machine type communications capability, which, you know, would allow for use cases that everybody likes to talk about: industrial automation, you know, telemedicine, you know, you have it. And so we've been doing quite a bit of research inside my organization using a RIC with AI/ML to do closed loop spectrum sharing. Because as you may imagine, right, I mean, it's certainly, you know, the United States has made news, unfortunately, more than once, right, when it comes to spectrum sharing between 5G capabilities and something else, that evolving, you know, how, you know, we approach spectrum sharing is something that's pretty important. And so I'm involved in another organization called the NextG Alliance in North America, which is an industry group working to try to shape, you know, a 6G vision, and I chair the Spectrum Working Group. And if past going from 1G to the next is prologue, right, the appetite for 6G spectrum is going to, you know, at least be an order of magnitude more than what it is for 5G. And what we know is if there's an expectation of mobility, when you look at spectrum charts, at least in my region, there isn't enough spectrum that could be cleared and licensed that would allow for, you know, continued deployment using the same models that we have today. And so evolving spectrum sharing is critical, and not only is it critical, it is an enabler for a number of different things. So like Torif was saying, right, the fine-grained controls that you might get both over how, you know, the radio access network is functioning and control over the UEs would create a toolkit, you know, within a RIC that might then be used for other types of use cases to continue to drive new revenue generation, whether it's, you know, smart mining, which Torif mentioned earlier, or some of these other use cases. We think the RIC is the avenue through which we could actually get to some of that innovation.
Thank you, Andrew. And you mentioned some of the XApps and RApps, and I think that's one of the greatest opportunities that Open RAN is bringing, and kind of opening the door for different vendors, for new vendors to innovate and enter into the space. Can you share your perspective of the ability of third-party vendors coming into developing XApps, RApps on top of a RIC platform? And is there, you know, an opportunity? What are the success factors for kind of new entrants or existing entrants to innovate in these XApps and RApps?
Yeah, maybe I go first. I think when we want to attract third-party developers, XApp developers, it's less of a technical problem right now, more than an organizational. And what we're doing as Nokia is we saw that there's a need for a place where third-party developers can integrate and test XApps. We're working in the interoperability lab in Berlin, in Germany, and with partners under i14y-lab.com, and there's also a booth in the upper floor. We are working on providing an environment, including simulators, including a Nokia Run and a Nokia Rig, where XApp developers can come and integrate and test their XApps in the most easy way possible. The other thing that we are doing is we are trying to make it easy for XApp developers to develop XApps. For this, we need developer-level instructions, we need demonstration XApps, and we also need documentation of the Nokia Run, E0B and G0B, and need to make that available for XApp developers. And this is what we currently experiment and trial with Brazilian research organization, Research Center, CPQD, where we try to provide this information via a website, open-ecosystem.org, and then see whether we can replicate this with other XApp developers as well. So this is, I think, what we should do in order to attract more developers into the ecosystem of third-party XApps.
Yeah, and maybe to follow on that, I do think that the ability for third parties to get access to the ability to write XApps and RApps is crucial. We've seen, with 4G LTE that a lot of the new revenue generation was done with software with over-the-top applications. And so you can list the number of organizations, in various innovation ecosystems around the world, right, that were involved in creating a whole lot of new money and new capabilities, Facebook, Google, and many others. With 5G, right, we already have, the ability for over-the-top apps to happen, but if we take the RIC as the platform upon which we may see some of that innovation actually occur, then opening up the ability for somebody who's an expert in hospitals to be able to come in and develop algorithms that are customized and specific to a particular industry vertical is going to be really key, because you don't want every new industry vertical to have to know everything about a 5G new radio system, right? They need to know their part of it so that they can develop solutions. And we, in my company, we've even flirted with, how do we do something like build an XApp RApp store, right? So that we can actually, make the innovation that people come up with, right, with their software development accessible, right, to the larger community, so that we can see systems integrators or value-added resellers being able to pick up these solutions, right, based on all this custom algorithm design, and export that into industry. And in particular, right, is again, looking back at LTE, a lot of the secret sauce, if you will, right, from the incumbent manufacturers was in the scheduler. And I think what we'll see, right, with the RIC, right, in XApps and RApps is that the algorithm development for, operating the RAN, and it's funny, a few weeks ago, one of my coworkers quipped that with the RIC and with creating the toolkit to go after spectrum sharing, if you'd be effectively creating a RAN operating system, right, where you could really create, customized solutions for those different industry verticals. And so opening up the ability for third parties to come in and write those applications, I think is amongst the crucial steps that must be followed in order to really see this take off.
Thank you. Thank you for discussing that. I think that's an amazing opportunity that we are all looking forward for having more innovation and vendors. And in terms of guaranteeing, ensuring this interoperability between the RIC and the underlying platform, at one hand, on the other hand, interoperability between RIC and these XApps, RApps. So for ensuring this interoperability, do we have everything that's needed to make sure there is no vendor lock-in, right? That's our goal. Is there a need for additional standardization or anything that you think might help?
If I go first again, yeah. The interoperability, yeah. So on the RIC platform side, if we are talking about interoperability, RIC platform versus cloud infrastructure, we have our hopes on the ANOCAT project, which develops reference architecture, reference implementation specification, reference conformance test suite for infrastructure, as well as for the cloud network functions. So that's one angle. then if you're talking about interoperability of XApps and the RIG platform, there aren't really too many options. There is, everybody can agree on a single interface to use, be that via standardization or via an open source project, a community of a developer that defines this interface specification. There's maybe the possibility of developing the same function, a single functionality, but then presenting it multiple times under different interfaces so that XApp developer can choose which one to use. And then the third option would be implementing adapters. And the last two are obviously really bad options. And we have our hopes on the standardization. Working Group 3 of ORAN is working on this. They have defined, or we have defined there, as part of the standardization, already a set of messages to be exchanged between the XApp and the RIG platform, abstract messages, and we are now, since a couple of weeks, in the process of translating them into two solution sets, one for gRPC and another one for protobuf messages over HTTP. And I think as this progresses, as the standard matures, we will see the actual product implementing this. The one thing that maybe is still to be added into the specification is to make these interfaces more scalable, because we want to see from the beginning the ability to scale XApps and to scale the RIG platform, most notably in the context of the E2 connections to the number of Gnode Bs. And this is what we think interoperability between XApps and RIG and interoperability between the RIG and the infrastructure actually means.
Thank you, Taraf.
And forgive me, let me make sure I got the question right, this echo. So the question is the role that standards might play, right? And okay, so when I look at conformity assessment regimes, really it comes in the flavors of performance, conformance, and interoperability. And a lot of times you don't have the ability to do interoperability testing, because if I have to look at an ecosystem that we're working on creating to increase supply chain diversity, it becomes an n squared over 2 problem, right? Trying to test, every one vendor solution with every other vendor solution, which makes conformance with the standards, right, and the ability to prove that all the more important. And I think the only way we're going to get, we're now shifting the focus, right, of where the integration testing is occurring from integrating an RU, a DU, and a CU. Now maybe having a conversation around doing the same things from a RIC and an XApp portability perspective. And I think we're only going to achieve success there if we do that through comprehensive standards development, test and evaluation, to get it to the point where we can achieve the same level of choice, selectivity, right, in moving my XApp from one RIC to the other, that we expect out of the ability to treat RU, DU, and CU like Legos, with just a fundamental expectation that I can put them together in any configuration, and that to have the confidence that they'll actually work together.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Taraf. I think we're kind of approaching the end of our RIC discussion. So I'd like to thank you about your insights. Definitely an area that we'll expect a lot of innovation. And as Andrew was saying, we'll see a lot of activity first in the innovation lab, in the testing and validation to make RIC successful. So thank you very much for your input and your participation on the panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you.
I think this is where.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Stelliana.
Thank you,
Really appreciate it. Stelliana, come over here, right next to the fruit stand, which is here for a purpose. Not sure what it is yet, but
you have a nice fruit stand.
I do. All right, so what do you think of the conversation? Is RIC, are we going to make it with the RIC, or is it still overhyped? What do you think?
I'm super excited about it, and I think it's important to make it work, because obviously RIC will bring a lot of optimization of resources that will probably save a lot of money for operators and make them optimize, do more of what they already have. And it's the best opportunity that Open RAN brings to bringing in new vendors and a lot of innovation in the intelligence in the RAN.
Excellent. And so, again, I think the RIC is one of the most promising aspects. And there you heard it from Stelliana, one of my favorite analysts, about the promise of RAN and the RIC and what we can expect in the future. So thank you, Stelliana.
Thank you, Roy.
Really appreciate you. All right, we've come to the last item on the main stage, and this is going to be pretty cool. Now, we promise, you'll be tasting the future of connectivity, and the emphasis is going to be on the word taste now.